We're about to dive into the single most extreme climate event our planet has ever known. I'm talking about a time when the entire Earth was wrapped in a sheet of ice for 60 million years. Now, this was an apocalypse that really should have snuffed out all life, but instead, it became the unlikely architect of, well, us. This is the incredible story of Snowball Earth.
Just think about that for a second. You have never, not once, experienced true silence. Why? Because everywhere you've ever been, life was already there. In the soil, in the air, buzzing in every little crack of every rock. There's always been a hum, a rustle, some sign of life. But just imagine standing at the equator 700 million years ago. There's no sound, no movement, no smell of dirt or rain. You're standing on a sheet of ice a kilometer thick under a pale, dim sun. The whole world is just a featureless white wasteland, and temperatures have plunged to a bone-chilling -50 degrees Celsius. The silence is absolute.
Okay, so let's get into it. To understand how this could even happen, we basically have to become forensic investigators, looking into a 700 million-year-old cold case. And the first clues we find, well, they seem completely impossible.
So geologists started finding these very specific kinds of rocks called tillites. They're the unmistakable signature of a glacier. Just this chaotic jumble of giant boulders and fine rock flour all ground up and left behind by moving ice. You find this stuff today in places like Antarctica or high up in the mountain.
So what's the big mystery? Well, geologists were finding these ancient tillites everywhere, including in the tropics, and we know for sure they were in the tropics when they formed because of this fascinating trick of geology called paleomagnetism. See, when rocks form, tiny magnetic minerals inside them line up with the Earth's magnetic field, and that locks in a record of their location. It's like a geological compass. And the compass in these rocks was pointing straight at the equator. I mean, imagine finding evidence of a massive glacier in the Amazon rainforest today. That's the kind of baffling puzzle scientists were up against.
And if you thought that was weird, the evidence gets even stranger. Meet the dropstone. These things are massive, sometimes house-sized boulders, just sitting in the middle of fine, deep ocean sediments where they have no business being. There's really only one way for that to happen. A giant iceberg had to carry that rock way out to sea and then melt, dropping it to the bottom. Finding these in what we knew were tropical waters, that was the smoking gun. Ice was floating in the warmest oceans on Earth.
So, how on earth does a planet freeze over completely? It definitely didn't happen overnight. It was the result of a very slow setup, followed by a terrifyingly fast plunge into the deep freeze, all driven by one of the planet's most dangerous feedback loops.
So it all started with a supercontinent called Rodinia, which was parked right on the equator. Now, this huge landmass was getting hammered by intense tropical rainfall. This rain, which is naturally a little bit acidic, reacted with the rocks and dissolved them. This whole process, called silicate weathering, pulled massive amounts of carbon dioxide, the planet's thermal blanket, right out of the atmosphere and locked it away on the ocean floor.
With its CO2 blanket getting thinner and thinner, the planet started to cool down, and the poles began to freeze. And this is where the runaway process kicked in. See, white ice is super reflective. It bounces about 90% of sunlight right back into space. So as the ice spread, the planet absorbed less heat, which meant more cooling, which of course meant even more ice. It was a vicious cycle that just started feeding on itself. And just look at this timeline. Once those ice sheets reached about 30 degrees latitude, that's roughly where Cairo is today. The point of no return was crossed. In what's basically a geological blink of an eye, just a few thousand years, the ice sheets from the North and South Poles crashed into each other at the equator. The blue marble was gone, and in its place was a white tomb that would stay frozen solid for 60 million years.
So, if the entire surface was a frozen desert and the oceans were capped with a kilometer of ice, cutting off all sunlight, how did anything survive? I mean, really, how did life hang on for 60 million years in the dark?
Well, life retreated. It found these tiny, isolated little pockets of warmth and energy. Deep down on the ocean floor, volcanic hydrothermal vents just kept on pumping out heat and chemicals, feeding bacteria that didn't need sunlight at all. And there were probably other little refuges too. Maybe cracks in the sea ice where a little bit of light could get through, or volcanic hot springs bubbling up on the frozen land.
Now, this is a really crucial point. These super stressful little pockets of life didn't just allow for survival, they actually forced innovation.
In these deadly environments, any organisms that could cooperate, that could form multicellular structures, they had a huge advantage. The genetic toolkit for complex life as we know it was literally forged in the fires of this frozen apocalypse.
So, how do you even begin to thaw an entire planet? Well, the answer is just as violent as the freeze. Because while the surface was totally inert, the Earth's internal engine, it never stopped running.
For millions and millions of years, volcanoes just kept erupting, punching right through the ice and pumping CO2 into the atmosphere. See, on a normal Earth, rain would wash that CO2 out of the sky, but on a Snowball Earth, there is no rain. So the CO2 just built up and up and up, eventually reaching levels maybe 350 times higher than they are today.
This massive buildup of CO2 created a super greenhouse effect. Eventually, the atmosphere trapped so much heat that the ice finally started to melt. And just like the freeze, the thaw was a runaway process. The planet swung violently from one extreme to the other, from a minus 50-degree global freezer to a plus 50-degree global furnace, all in just a few thousand years.
And this insane climatic whiplash has a direct connection to every one of us. The world that emerged from the ice was not the same world that had entered it. And the life that came next, our own distant ancestors, was unlike anything that had ever come before.
Right after the thaw, the fossil record just explodes. All of a sudden, we see the arrival of the Ediacaran biota. These are the first large, kind of strange and complex multicellular creatures in Earth's history. They were the pioneers, carpeting the seafloor of a world that was being completely reborn. So the snowball event had, in effect, just wiped the evolutionary slate clean. And as the glaciers melted, they dumped this massive pulse of ground-up rock, pure nutrients, into the oceans. This fueled an explosion of photosynthetic life, which in turn pumped the atmosphere full of oxygen, allowing for bigger, more active animals to evolve. The crisis actually created the opportunity.
And here it is, the most direct connection to you. The very elements that make you who you are, the calcium in your bones, the phosphorus in your DNA, they were ground out of the continental rock by those ancient glaciers and then washed into the oceans during that great thaw. You are, in a very real sense, built from the wreckage of this ancient apocalypse.
You know, the story of Snowball Earth, it reveals a planet that's way more volatile and sensitive than we can even imagine. But it also reveals the incredible resilience of life. That unbroken chain of survivors who endured the freeze and then survived the furnace led eventually to us. When we study this distant past, we are, in a very real way, the universe looking back at its own history. We are the legacy of those who refused to let the fire go out.
If you enjoyed this journey through deep time, like, share, and subscribe, and join us